World Bank loan approved yesterday. I think the feeling was that we would get that loan. We don't know what the conditions are, but good news for South Africa, Tony.
It certainly is good news. It prevents the electricity utility from having to shop around and perhaps borrow the same amount of money in smaller retail-sized chunks. So when you shop big, you usually get a good price. So I think it's, on the whole, a very, very good development for the country, let alone Eskom.
Prior to this decision, Simon, we saw the Finance Minister talking about conditions that could be attached to this, and if there were very strict conditions attached to the World Bank loan, then South Africa would be able to cope without that $3.75 billion. It's now been granted. Conditions haven't really come to the table as yet, but there was talk about the ruling party not benefiting from this loan. Of course, we're going to be seeing some light shed on this later on as things progress, but what are you expecting on that front?
I mean, the issue around the ruling parties, the Chancellor House and the turbines and the like, I'm not quite sure how they can get around that. I suppose in a sense they could say the money is not to be used for turbines, it's going to be used for something else, but at the end of the day the money is going into that construction. Exactly where the World Bank money goes is not going to make a huge difference. But I do think that the government is going to take, and we've taken a very strong stand. If you go back to '94, when the IMF and the World Bank both said to South Africa there's money available, and then President Mandela said no thank you, the conditions are going to be an issue, but I don't think they're going to come with onerous conditions. Tony was saying before we went on air, the World Bank is generally not so onerous. It's the IMF who kind of says, fix yourself up, then we will do the loan environment. The conditions are probably not going to be onerous. We could get elsewhere, but this is a much nice, clean, as Tony said, one place, one deal, one good price.
Well, Tony, of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what Eskom really needs for its build program going forward. Do you think the fact that we have secured the World Bank loan at this stage means it'll be easier to raise finance for the rest of the project as we move forward?
I'm sure that it's given the country, the utility, and the two coal-fired power stations a touch of respectability. If you can jump the hurdles that the World Bank erects to sort of filter loan applications, your project is probably really worthwhile.
The US, the UK and the Netherlands abstained from making a decision on the World Bank loan yesterday, Simon, and no surprise there because it is about alternative energies right now, environmental issues very much at play as well, but we've gotten it right. Coal-fired power plants is going to be a reality in South Africa because we do have coal in abundance here.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we have coal in abundance and importantly close to the power station, because trucking coal, it's a heavy, in that sense, expensive to move around. And green power is a wonderful idea and the like, and we will get there as a nation, as a planet in time. But right now we have a crisis. We need electricity, and we need it, frankly, literally, we needed it in our past, not in our future. We can't start, playing with wind and the like. We need to go that coal route. The counter to it had an argument, but at the moment it's just a needs analysis. We need it, it's going to roll forward, and at least abstaining rather than voting against, I suppose, they can go back to their constituents and say, we never voted for this bad stuff, and at least they didn't.
Although they do use coal-powered technology themselves, don't they?
Well, of course they do. I mean, some places, France to a larger degree, England a little bit, Germany, there's a lot of nuclear power out there. We're getting to some clean power, but at the moment this is a planet that runs on coal. That's the reality, and it's going to remain that for a long time. Maybe in 100 or 200 years we would have completely weaned ourselves off coal, but it's a cheap and viable source. Polluted, yes, but at the moment it's how the power is created on this planet.
Well, Tony, it had been rumoured if we hadn't got the World Bank loan, then China might have been willing to come forward with some of that funding. Do you think that China is a possibility for funding for any of the rest of the program? Do you think it would be keen to lend money?
The Medupi power station, for which this loan was granted, has a total cost of about 130 billion rand. We got a loan of 28 billion rand yesterday. So there's plenty left to borrow, and I'm sure that the Chinese financial institutions, with certainly the grunt to be able to lend large sums of money, will be very interested.
Well, some say, Tony, that we've got to be wary of Chinese funding because that could mean a lot more conditions than what we'd be seeing from the World Bank. Yes, if you're looking for tags and conditions, I
I would certainly be a lot more wary of the fine print in a Mandarin contract than I would be in a World Bank contract.
And you, of course, need a good Mandarin translator for
Indeed,
that as well.
yes, yeah.
Simon, perhaps moving on to some other economic news, and we had manufacturing production numbers out yesterday. Came in slightly disappointing, month on month down 1.5%, year on year up 2.7%, and the market was looking for a reading of about 2.7%. So it looks like this recovery we're seeing isn't a very straight line upwards. It is going to be a little jagged as we move along.
Absolutely, and I think it's a no-brainer that the recovery locally and globally is going to be very jagged rather than just a nice straight line. Share prices did the straight line, but the reality on the ground is a different kettle of fish entirely. It also suggests that perhaps, and people have been saying this for a while on this desk, is that a lot of the manufacturing was inventory restocking and the like, and that's now sort of fooled itself up to a fair degree. Now we've got to start moving those products and getting the consumer buying. And if you look at public sector credit extension and the like, the consumer still under pressure, a lot better than they were a year ago or 2 years ago, but still under pressure.
And Tony, these manufacturing numbers are not so bad from the export perspective, even though we've seen that very strong rand.
No, the world, as Simon has just said, like South Africa, has been restocking, and the export figures are certainly not shabby, although we must remember they are coming from a dreadfully low base.
Of course, we did see those PMI figures out last week, Tony, and we had the PMI tagging down in March, so looking forward to March for the manufacturing sector, it looks like we could have another bad reading then.
Yes, the PMI figures do tend to look ahead rather than at the industry at the point of time of measuring. But you know, Simon's right. Nothing's going to move in a straight line. Certainly in the world of economics, as opposed to the world of finance, things hardly ever move in a straight line. And perhaps we were getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of the relationship between manufacturing output, even mining output, and prices in both those areas relative to final demand or retail trade numbers.
Well, something that definitely hasn't been moving in a straight line, of course, is the very strong rand, Simon. Let's look at that. The rand so strong, we've got flows coming into South Africa. A big question mark over how are we going to handle that 28 billion rand that we're going to be getting from the World Bank as well. Can you only imagine what it will do to the rand?
It is, and I mean, the rand is just, you know, I think far too much of South Africa still sits in the mindset of the rand's a one-way bet, and that bet is towards weakness. But we peaked in, what, 22nd of December 2001 at about 1360 odd against the rand versus the dollar, and we've just been moving and moving since then. And again, we weakened significantly in 0809 up to 1011, and that wasn't flows out. You know, foreigners selling equities in the JSE and running their money back to under their beds in New York and London and the like, and now we've seen that money coming back in. And that 28 billion, and as Tony says, 28 billion is a start of that process. It's kind of like, what, a quarter or so of what they absolutely need, in fact a little bit less than a quarter. There's a lot more coming. We've got 7 on the horizon, a lot sooner than we've got 8 on the horizon.
Tony, any ideas how they're going to bring that money into the country? Of course, would they want to bring it in now while the rand is so strong? Would they want to wait for the rand to weaken? And where will it go?
I have a very, very strong feeling that most of that money will never come into the country. It will be used to pay offshore suppliers for a number of important components going into the power stations. And why bring it onshore and then run the exchange rate risk, the normal exchange rate risk of it being worth less when you want to take it out again. I agree with Simon. I think stronger before weaker for the rand, but I think a lot of that 3.7 billion will stay offshore.
Tony, before we say goodbye, you said stronger before weaker. When do you expect the rand to weaken?
I've got a stick in the ground at 675 before we do weaken. I think we could be seeing a growing trend of weakness by the last third, the last 4 months of 2010.